Hey guys, George Mesa, Third Eye Edify podcast. And I welcome you to part 3 of this music mini series as I take a look down the barrel of music history leading up to the 20th century, primarily focused on Germany and Europe in general, and a little Russia too, as we will get to eventually. But this particular episode, I'm taking a small detour from strictly looking at the German side of things, and there will be Germany involved, but I wanted to mention that during the Romantic era, the 1800s, the 19th century, which is where this music miniseries started, as you'll remember, with Carl Maria von Weber and his opera Der Freischütz. There was something else that occurred during this time period that I don't think people are fully aware of. And I want to make very clear that the idea of a rock star is far before any kind of video killed the radio star life, MTV or otherwise. Rock stars were prevalent enough as an idea for them to actually exist in the 19th century in Europe. And there's two people in particular that get credited with this. And they're not called rock stars, of course. They're called traveling virtuosos. Now, some of you may already know at least one of the two people I'm going to mention. So, unless, of course, the thumbnail didn't give it away. So, let me quote one of them before I get started here. This is one of the two traveling virtuosos, aka rock stars that I will mention. Franz Liszt, Hungarian-born piano player who was a rock star in many, many more ways than one. And this quote was based on him responding to one of his, I wouldn't say detractors, but somebody who was teaching a lot like he was also. This wasn't just someone who hit the stage, he was teaching too. And he wasn't charging. He was a philanthropist by nature. And both of these men were. And I want to make correlations based on that concept of philanthropy among many others that I think you'll find surprising and interesting. So, in response to finding out that a certain teacher was making millions of dollars, million francs, and maybe it's a small exaggeration, of course, but if you teach all day, every day, the money could come in, sure. And since he was teaching without charge and claiming that it was taking up all of his time, wasting all of his energy, aside from the glamour of being a very, very popular, in-demand, and famous rock star, he said, as an artist, you do not rake in 1,000,000 marks without performing some sacrifice on the altar of art. This is hopefully in line with all of the ideals I've presented so far about this particular section of the world being really in line with the beauty of art and humans in general, and just wanting to find a sense of their own reality, away from the perils of, let's just call it, something along the lines of, and I don't want to say the wrong, term here, but just the idea of materialism. Let's just call it materialism, because that is a big part of what people are trying to get away from, as it started to be abundantly clear that that was possibly going to take over the natural existence of people by the time this time period came rolling around. So, and as usual, give me some space as I look through my very large amount of convoluted notes here. So who are these virtuosos? Do they have a lot in common? They knew each other, as a matter of fact. And the very first one worth mentioning here, the one who really started it all, is Niccolo Paganini, who was born in Genoa, Italy, as a matter of fact. He managed to take an instrument, the violin, and convince people that he was in possession of techniques and ideas that could only have been, of course, did you already guess? Could only have been derived by making a pact with the devil. A true rock star, no question. And there's some, again, very interesting parallels to make here, where Paganini, his father noticed the skill. He realized that there was something to be gained from this, perhaps. And much like the story we hear with Mozart, who is Johannes Chrysostomus Wolfgangus Theophilus Mozart, a Freemason, and we'll get into all that. Mozart's father is famous for having realized the talent at a very, very young age for Mozart. Michael Jackson is very famous, an actual rock star that we know from our time. Michael Jackson is known as his father just locked him up and made him amazing, forced him to become amazing. There's other musicians, the very unfortunate bass player Jaco Pastorius, basically, learn this, I'll be back next week. Just kind of forced into it, whether they enjoyed it or not. These two traveling virtuosos had the same exact scenario. And their fathers actually toured with them early on. This is in the historical record. So I want to quickly mention that his name is interesting, Niccolo Paganini. I see the word pagan in this name. Paganini. It almost sounds like some sort of chant, some sort of conjuring almost. And people believed this about him, not regarding the name, but the way that he performed in his. As you can see, just look at this image alone. It really does say something, doesn't it? About the way he was perceived. He looks like a man possessed. He also has very interesting features, very long legs, very long, slender legs. His fingers seem to have to curl unnaturally just to hold the bow. Paganini, and it wasn't named this at the time, but he had something called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. I have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. My skin is hyperflexible, and as a result, I can bend my finger back all the way to the back of my hand. Now, he had this apparently. I think it gives me advantages as a musician. I really do believe that. I thought it would give me advantages in yoga, and it really didn't, actually. Not at all, I would say. But I'm so curious to find more about how many people that are known as world-renowned musicians had this. This can be a very helpful condition if it's not extreme. Picture with the typical like circus freak that can fit themselves in a box and stuff like that. These are people that have Ehlers-Danlos in a very extreme way. So I wonder how many other musicians of high caliber had this. It can be an advantage. I've also gotten out of a few times when I should have broken my ankle, should have broken my wrist, and I didn't, and I know I should have. And I can just flex around it. Very interesting. So think about this. At the very least, he was writing his own pieces. He was a composer as well, much like his other contemporary rock star, Franz Liszt. He was attempting to, and successfully, I would say, on paper it means nothing, but when you make it happen live, he was mimicking the sounds of animals. He was retuning his instrument to alter the usual sounds you would get from a violin, changing the frequency relationship between the instrument and the listener. This was automatically being coined as having a pact with the devil right away. No one had ever heard anything like it before. Or is it like a lot of rock stars where they manage to do something that catches the attention of lots of people because they haven't heard it before, but it's not new to the music world? This often happens with rock and jazz. Jazz musician like Alan Holdsworth, he'll do something crazy, and then somebody like Eddie Van Halen will come around and do similar things, and suddenly he's amazing, first time ever God. And yet there's plenty of people that have been doing this before him. Not taken away from anybody. But it's just a timing thing. It's a marketing thing. These people were marketing. And Paganini understood that people were coming to bear witness to him. He'd show up cloaked, very dark figure. He was very stoic overall. He wore white gloves that he would take off, and people wanted them. But that's more documented with Franz Liszt. White gloves, yes. Who else wore white gloves? Michael Jackson and Mickey Mouse. Think about, and the good old Mickey glove, 4 fingers, of course. Michael Jackson's a little more flashy. Michael Jackson also had been known to wear the Sgt. Pepper looking outfit, referencing that very interesting album cover that also stars Aleister Crowley. I have a much larger connection to make to Beatlemania with our next traveling virtuoso, so just hang tight for that. This possessed by the devil thing went so far that Paganini lived from October 27th, 1782 until May 27th, 1840. Now, like I said, he was born in Genoa, Italy. He traveled Europe. He was a traveling virtuoso, unheard of at the time. The first real rock star. And he was denied a Catholic burial because there was already all this stigma around him. But he also, unfortunately, when the priest was called to give him his last rites, he died right before the priest got there. And this already, very, very controversial person, that pushed it. That said, you see, the devil wanted him dead before he ever got his final rites. So they denied him a Catholic burial in Genoa. And his body was moved 6 times over 56 years until it was finally time to put him back at the place where he was born. Believe it or not. So here's his resting place. This didn't happen until 56 years after his death. Maybe there's more significance to find here. There probably is. As far as a body being moved 6 times before finding its final resting place. Very interesting. Now, there's another connection to make between these two that's really worth mentioning for sure. And that is every traveling European's best friend at the time, syphilis. Very interesting that they would both be claimed to have it, and neither of them were claimed to have been killed by it. But it's a very prominent feature of many famous people, especially somebody like this. Why? Well, you tell me. These traveling virtuosos were, whether they wanted it or not, they were attracting the opposite sex rampantly. So the fun was to be had, as a rock star often would: sex, drugs, and rock and roll, right? Drugs in this case being mercury and opium, because that's how they were trying to cure the syphilis for Paganini. And it was being said that there was too much mercury, and that might have been a big part of his decline. But he was asked to play for some very important people, but he actually avoided playing in front of the King of France near the end of his life due to a heavy cough. Just think about this COVID all over again, and there's more to the story than that, by the way, which I will get to. So I think that his own sense of hypermaterialism may have actually led him further down this path. He eventually had a kid. He wanted to do what he could for that child, and actually that drove him to make more money. He's famously went to the UK and asked for double ticket price. Caused an uproar. And they eventually reverted that. Because once they heard him, they took it all back. There was mass media for both of these traveling virtuosos. There was nothing but a clamoring to be the first to write about him when he showed up. And they often showed up in secret, and then they were just suddenly ready to play. Interesting that this feels like modern times. The gossip, the scandals. Who's he with? He has a kid? This is all very rock star. There's nothing new under the sun here whatsoever. This is the beginning of the true rock star. In 1827, he received from Pope Leo XII the Order of the Golden Spur. Just like Mozart, this was, without a doubt, there is the typical kind of split cross image where the cross edges are not flat. It's supposed to be the image of a pyramid opened up from the top, by the way. This is a definite sign of Freemasonry, and you wouldn't think, if you watch this show at least, I don't think you would second guess the idea that most of these great composers were Freemasons. But here is a great example of, people often say, especially with the single eye imagery and all that stuff, even I showed Godzilla had it, we know that there's backing, there's funding, there's Freemasonic connection, there's handlers, sure, MK Ultra, all that stuff. All this, I don't just throw out names here on this show. I like to at least get some idea, get some receipts about this stuff. But there was clearly backing for the idea of a rock star all the way back when, because it has an effect. And as we'll see with Franz Liszt, it can even offer sponsorships, which again, hint, hint, what's changed? Nothing's changed. So everyone wrote about him at the time. It was equivalent to Beatles concerts. People wanted those gloves. The silent death of the mobster, hitman. Now, his technique has been called smoke and mirrors. His compositions are good enough, but they're often used as practice routines except for some of the more extreme ones. But I want to make a comment about this idea of his growing legend giving him sort of a pop star edge. He didn't unlike his contemporary, who was super harmonically advanced as far as how the chords were structured and all the much more interesting notes that you can, all the more interesting note combinations you can produce on the piano, as opposed to the violin, of course, which is, it's restricting in some sense versus what you can do on a piano all at once. He used these note combinations of his own on the violin to dazzle. It had been called smoke and mirrors. It's like dressing up, picture it this way, it's like dressing up for image to guide fandom and expectations. The modern pop star. His European tour, by the way, was 1828 to 1831. He was also knighted by one of Napoleon's widows, the Archduchess Mary Louis. And this is like McCartney's, like Elton John. He was knighted. Huge parallels that I think are very hard to avoid. Picture this too. I want to make it clear that Paganini potentially was more of the typical pop star who had talent and was actually writing their own music, unlike most pop stars nowadays. But overall, at an advanced music theory level, his music was on its face simpler thematically, theoretically, but it was the way he presented it, the technique, and of course the dark, shadowy man with the pale, slender face, with his fingers looking very odd to the average person, doing all kinds of mimicking sounds of animals and stuff. So my point is that while Franz Liszt was just possibly a more intricately interesting to listen to trained musician, Paganini was also very good. We don't want to take away anything, but it's simpler, it's more scalar, it's more diatonic. There's more chordal arpeggios, which are less difficult to do, but easier for the common listener to get a hold of. a concept I have discussed before and we'll get to as I push this miniseries forward. This episode was going to be Wagner, by the way, but I had put up something on my Substack, please do find me there, about, I said, should I do that next or should I do the Traveling Virtuosos next? And Dylan Sicoccio, thank you, my man. Please follow him on Substack. It's hard to find someone doing the kind of research he is at any level. And he suggested that I do this one, and here it is. I've been waiting to do this episode for a very, very, very long time. So I think that's enough about Paganini. You get the idea? He produced an image. He was a true rock star, and much like the modern pop musician, he wasn't the most interesting to a learned musician. But still, it's the way that it's played. It's the ideas that it brings. And there's nothing wrong with that. He was obviously very, very talented. And the comments, they couldn't even believe what they were hearing most of the time. And people said there's nothing like it. He has no equal. So the consensus was almost 100% positive. Now, actually, about Paganini, last but not least, he did play guitar. Here's your rock star again. And apparently when he played guitar, he was much calmer, didn't do some of the crazy stuff he did, not flailing his body around, doing the usual rock star stuff, the act, so to speak. But he used it to swoon women very often, apparently. Much like you would see the typical, mandolin playing to the lady with the long hair at the top of the tower. So, picture it. He obviously produced an image that was very important. So, let's look at our next person here. This is Franz Liszt, clearly showing off the hidden hand, as expected. But here's his right hand, so perhaps he's hiding the wrong hand on purpose. It looks like he's older here. We're getting to the point where photos may be a thing this is not. Or is it? I don't think this is, but you never know. This was a piano master, and virtuoso is, the term is thrown around, but this Franz Liszt's music on the piano is still kind of the mark of a champion almost for a lot of piano players. It's like if you can play it, you've excelled yourself to quite a higher level than most. So, and now Paganini falls in the category, especially with the tempos that have to be played, but I don't think it's as crazy as playing a Franz Liszt piece on piano in certain respects. And that's not knowing all of their music. So keep that in mind as I say this. His father was a cellist, but he was also in service for Nicholas II, Prince Esterházy. Esterházy was a humongous family at the time, big-time Hungarian family. Learned under Haydn. And he knew his son's talent was coming, so he did the same thing. And he toured with his son at first until a very unfortunate ship accident, killed his father. He was there for his father's death during the beginning of his playing. And it's a very unfortunate story, of course. So, in 1841, this man, Franz Liszt, was admitted to the Unity zur Einigkeit is probably how it's pronounced, lodge in Frankfurt. Also, again, a Freemason. Paganini gave him his initial inspiration to do this, by the way. He saw Paganini, was taken away, blown away, and moved on to doing what he ended up doing. He was eventually promoted to his second degree and elected master as a member of the lodge zur Eintracht in Berlin, also an honorary member of the Lodge of Modestia cum Libertate. So again, Mason, there's an agenda. There is Lisztmania, as was coined by this guy, Marie Henry Bailey. I don't know how to say his name, I'm sorry. This was called the Stendhal syndrome. This person's pen name was Stendhal. This is a syndrome where you get manically excited about something and cannot control your mania. The word meant a little different than when we're used for Beatlemania nowadays, where you can get crazy about anything. even just a dish at a restaurant that you like. This was different. This was considered a contagious problem, like a disease, the Liszt mania, where people were fainting and swooning. And to the point where it is documented that people were suggesting immunization from this. Immunization. We're talking about the 19th century here. A genuine contagious medical condition. That's what this was called. Here's a list again with some prominent figures. I did not write the names out, but a real historian would know who these people are. It's not music history, except for the bust in the window. That is Beethoven. Beethoven is famously, this is all myth at this point. And if you look closely, Liszt is leaning far to his left, his right shoulder exposed. And this could be, as my nerd kicks in, this could be a kind of call out to what a lot of composers often said, that he is always looking over my shoulder. He being Johann Sebastian Bach. So potentially the part of the art is there. I can't say. Now, we have art like this. The Hunenschlacht, or the Battle of the Huns. Think of Attila the Hun, by Wilhelm von Kaulbach. Absolutely stunningly beautiful. And I will say this, there is a humongous affinity for Japanese entertainment and art, and I'm not one to stay away from it. I love a lot of anime movies, and a few series in general I think are just amazing. Genius even. I highly suggest anyone that is never or doesn't know or maybe was reserved about it to watch Attack on Titan. The story is unbelievable and hides some very, very specific things. Now, about the myth that I was discussing, this is an image not of a real event, apparently, but Liszt, a tiny Liszt, steps away from the piano. Beethoven walks up to him and kisses him on the forehead, his third eye. This is not confirmed. This is myth at this point, but it would be called an artistic christening. It's a very interesting term for you music history buffs out there. This was supposedly April 13th, 1823. There's a time documented of this, but no one is confirming that the kiss actually happened. It almost sounds like the kiss of death, actually, but in this scenario, it definitely would not have been. And Liszt, by the way, was taught by Carl Czerny, Czerny. Anyone who's been to a music store a lot or knows anything about piano etudes, you've seen the name. He's there. His fingers on a lot of the pulse of a lot of learners. Antonio Salieri, who has been questioned for poisoning Mozart, if anyone's seen the movie, he recognized Liszt as well and was able to train him. So they're all related. They're all related. And as I was saying earlier, Liszt was used to showcase and sell Erard pianos, E-R-A-R-D. So he had endorsements, and he would play those wherever he could, wherever pianos could be delivered, because they weren't always waiting for him when he got there. I want to mention, too, that Wagner, who's coming in the next episode, please do look forward to that. It's going to be one of my largest research projects I've probably ever done. Wagner considered Liszt the music of the future, and I am going to be using content from Wagner's essay, The Art Work of the Future, and his other one called The Music of the Future. We will discuss all of those things in the next episode. Both of these instrumentalists also didn't just utilize the full range of the instrument, which is a little tougher on violin, I would say. At least with piano, the keys are all the same size, and you can just stretch yourself out to the full range. Using the full range properly is always difficult. But these are called extended techniques. Not just extended range, but the whole idea of mimicking sounds of animals on violin, for example. These are extended techniques, not the common thing you would learn at first. And this is a big part, I think, of what allured people, other than the image of the person, other than what preceded them before you ever saw. It's like, oh, Liszt is coming. Wow. These people had names, and those names got around. List's dad did the old school, just putting photos up all over the place. Come see the incredible young List. Nobody knew who he was. I remember putting posters up all over my old local towns, or going to the town where the bar I was going to play at was. Again, nothing new under the sun. Very cool, actually. So keep in mind what I was saying earlier, too, that he gave his proceeds to charity very often, List, and Paganini did the same thing. He was a philanthropist, and many corrupt agencies are often philanthropically associated, whether it's tax write-offs or look how much I do for the community, right? So I'm not saying that they were evil or ill-intended in any way, but there may have been hidden hands guiding their progress or making sure of their progress. It's hard to say. It's very hard to find information on this. But this is the nature of what people think rock stars are too. So I'm making that point that this is where it's from. It all started here. And I think the Freemasonic concept is not discussed very often, or at all even. And it really needs to be on the table more often. It's there. The hidden hand is there. Very clearly and obviously. It's in the historical record. Very obvious. I want to remind that there was overly crazed fans for this List mania. And much like you saw at the Beatles concert, where they apparently stopped playing because it was too loud, which I think is just total BS. This was a very real thing. And people were fainting. And women they couldn't wait to get his silk handkerchief and his gloves. So there's no way I can't overstate it enough. This was a big deal. And no one was ever doing this before. There's tales of Johann Sebastian Bach traveling, but that was within Germany. He would go from church to church, fix it, jump in those big organ pipes and pound them out so they were pitched properly and all kinds of crazy stuff. But he traveled. It was the nature of what he was about to do, his work. This was not a traveling virtuoso. Well, he could have been, but he didn't go around all of Europe and even potentially Russia. So, definitely a big deal, without a doubt, a big, big, big deal. So let me see. Did I miss any of my shots here? No, I don't think I did, actually. Just making sure I didn't miss any of the pictures I was looking to pull up. So, but my overall point here is that it's partially what I had just said, but more importantly, and Franz Liszt, I didn't mention this before, I'm sorry. He lived from October 22nd. They almost had the same birthday, 1811, until July 31st, 1886. So these rock stars, not only did they amass wealth like a rock star, unheard of for a musician, unheard of. Not only were they philanthropists, just like typical mobster, aka Wall Street banker bad guy, not only were people screaming at the top of their lungs and clamoring for these people at the unreal nature of their otherworldly playing, one of which was prescribed a pact with the devil, which Liszt did not receive that honor, if you want to call it that. Not only were they both Freemasons who canoodled with very, very, very rich people, and not only were they both composers, but they both had their fathers tour with them at their earlier times, much like the stories we hear with Mozart and Michael Jackson. Franz Liszt was endorsed for a certain instrument, a certain brand of piano. These are undeniable placeholders in history to lead into the 20th century, where this would become apparently a need. It never was, it never is. But we're slowly turning music into a need with these virtuosos. And I think that's what the point was. I believe that they were placed, and now you need the initial talent. You have to have it. It's not like these castrati, where they would just remove the testicles young and hope that they survive that and do well with their singing training to keep their positions. I may end up talking about that down the line here too, in more detail. But this is prepping the populace to forget what they're doing and do whatever it takes to get in the door to see this unbelievable virtuoso, this unbelievable talent who's ready to play their music for you. Very often people would go see performances of music and the composer was not there. There's a fine line here. When you go to see rock band, it's their music that they're performing for you. Now, a lot of times, especially with the modern pop stars, there's a very, very large number of names on the list of people that actually wrote the music. And there's even more people behind the financial backing of the tours and all this other stuff. But this was essentially, as history is allowing us to see, these were one-man shows. Their riches allowed them to do all this. Paganini famously had a lawyer. He also famously took part in attempting to open a casino, and that kind of bankrupted him, which is really just a shame overall, a Paganini casino. So my point is that, as I had discussed thoroughly in my previous music miniseries, I do think you should go back and check that out. There's a playlist to click on for that. I think it's really clear that the idea of the rock star was always going to happen. And it's a big part of why there is a visible and palpable decline in culture here in the West, particularly in the United States. And now it's turning into who knows what. Another level of layering of things that I'll get to. Just not quite ready for it yet. But I think every single bit of this, not even including, I'm barely discussing music theory and how the times change for that and moving on into the 20th century. Just the manipulation of notes, the ideas of equal temperament, the eventually 440 hertz being agreed upon. Aside from all that, just this need for entertainment at this particular level, where there's an actual pop star icon that all the women can't wait to have. How familiar does this sound? It didn't just pop up with Elvis. It wasn't Nat King Cole. Not like that was ever going to happen. There's a lot more to this. And when they're all Freemasons, are you a Freemason? Do you know a Freemason at a high level? I really, really, really doubt it. So these are few and far between people. And to use music to manipulate the masses is potentially the easiest thing you can possibly do if you are looking to manipulate many, many millions of people. Shakespeare, it wasn't good enough. Sure, they got a bunch of witches out of the way with that one, with Macbeth. But it took more than that. King James Bible didn't quite have as much of the effect as they would have liked, I don't think. Because it looks like after MTV, we hit the 90s, moving into the late 90s, 2000s. It's really, it's always keeping people where they are. Sports isn't doing it anymore, I don't think. They're still gambling, but that's different. It's a different level of this. Pop stars have a place. They have a purpose. And they might not even know it. It's very sad. So I hope you enjoyed this little romp through the traveling virtuosos of the 19th century. It was a small departure from the angle of my music miniseries, but it is definitely important to mention this right now as I start to discuss more about what led to the kind of art that the 20th century experienced and the cultural implications that it had, some very nefarious. Well, you know what to do. Follow me on wherever you're watching this, but if you want to support me, I'm on Patreon, but more importantly, I'm on Substack now, and I'm really enjoying that platform a lot, and I think all of you will also. If you've only heard of it or weren't sure about jumping on, I think you should. I think it's a great platform. It's all of these platforms are susceptible to manipulation and other things, but as of right now, Substack is the friendliest for the creator. So you can support me there as well, because Rockfin is good as dead. And eventually I'll have a website where you can just support me directly. But for now, the place to find me and eventually, not just my exclusives, but more, will be on Substack, as a matter of fact. So find me there. The links are in the show notes, of course. Thank you so much. I'll see you next time.